I'd like to welcome everybody. السلام عليكم جميعا. يمكن اخذنا احنا ال 10 الى ال 14 دقيقه دول، لان في كتير جدا ناس بعتوا لنا ايميلات ان هم لسه بيحاولوا يدخلوا، عندهم ايشو مع اللوجن. بس احنا مضطرين ان احنا نبدا طبعا، وهنراعي فكره ال1 اور. بالنسبه لكم احب طبعا ارحب بيكم في اكاديميه نسيج. I just give a brief. دكتور مارتا واستاذ في جامعه نيو ستون هول، ومحرره في كتاب Creating of High Functional Library Space، ومحاضر مستمر مع ال ALA. Please start دكتور مارتا، وفي النهايه ان شاء الله هيبقى في الاسئله لحضرتك.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar and to say how pleased I am to have you here with me. The webinar, as Dr. Abdullah told you, is called Refiguring the 21st Century Academic Library Space. We are going to be talking today about doing mainly library expansions or library renovations. However, everything that we're going to talk about is relevant to starting a new library building project. I'm going to start by taking you through new current trends in library architecture design, give a quick historical overview of academic libraries, and then we'll look at the steps for undertaking a library project. Trends in library design. Library buildings have always been influenced by developments in information technology. The Babylonians were the first to create a classification system, which in its own way is really a kind of information technology in itself. We know that libraries were among the first to adopt databases to store their bibliographic citations, such as OCLC, and thus libraries have always been at the forefront of computing and information technology. What's different now? In the past, I would say probably around 1970s, as computers became more and more advanced until now, computing and information technology changed the design and also purpose of a library, an academic library in particular. The library was formed from a brick and mortar storage facility to more of an intellectual space. Why was that? Well, with the increased numbers of digital materials, you could reduce the footprint of book collections. And with that, you had much more flexibility on how you wanted to design your space and use it for different kinds of purposes. Accompanying that were big advances as far as communication, wireless internet access throughout the library, automated circulation and retrieval systems, and so forth. So today, libraries are very different than they were even 15 or 20 years ago. Here's an example of something called a Library News Center, which is at the Dartmouth Baker Berry Library. This is in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, Hanover, Massachusetts is where Dartmouth is. If you take a look at the design of the space, you'll see that it offers really comfortable seating that's arranged in a casual manner. In this space, there are no books, but there's a TV monitor over here on the far left, which is featuring news from around the world. Also, there are electronic and print magazines and newspapers. So this is entirely devoted to news sources. Another example that we might want to look at is something called a collaborative commons. Collaborative commons is a new space at the University of Austin, Texas, that will connect students with campus experts in research, writing, speech, and digital media technology. So this, exactly as it says, being collaborative, it's where community comes together to connect with faculty and librarians on campus. What are the problems that are inherent in a redesign or renovation? Well, there are really two major problems inherent in a library redesign. The first is the expectation of the library users, who naturally expect the most modern technology. This is very difficult to achieve in older buildings because many of them don't have the capacity for electrical wiring outlets. Even buildings that were designed 10 or 15 years ago were not planned to accommodate technologies like printers, laptops, iPhones, etc. The second problem inherent in a redesign or renovation is fixed function library spaces. And by this I mean spaces that are defined for one thing and are very difficult to reconfigure for another. Most of the demands today are for collaborative spaces, as we just saw in the two previous examples. Couple that with expectations for traditional library services like interlibrary loan, circulation, and reference, and you can see how the difficulties in renovating or expanding a library space. How did we get to today, and why are our concepts of what constitutes a library, why have they changed so much? A lot of it has to do with new educational theories that stress collaboration over solitary learning, but the most important game changer has been technology. It's very instructive to step back and look at the history of library architecture, since many of these key concepts are still with us today. So let's take a look at what's right and wrong about them and what's useful to our ideas today about libraries. The oldest form of library design is the book hall. And the book hall is the traditional medieval concept of the library as sacred space. So it's mainly a room with very large bookshelves going around the perimeter of it. While it's very beautiful, and modern libraries often harken back to this ideal as a design element, it's actually quite impractical for the storage and retrieval of books, which are placed on bookshelves around the room and sometimes requiring a ladder to retrieve them. And here we'll see some examples of this gorgeous space that is frequently adapted in some form to new library design. You have here the barreled ceilings up here, the beautiful wood, polished wood. Over here you have the staircase, the winding staircase that goes up with very high books above the, going up to the ceiling. The second kind of space, architectural space, is the book stack. And the book stack is a tripartite structure, three-part structure, containing book stacks, separated work areas for patrons and staff. And some examples of this include the Widener Library at Harvard, the British Library, and also the Library of Congress. Here are some examples of it. You can see actually very interestingly on the left how sturdy and heavy those steel girders are that are holding up the bookshelves. And here is a typical view of the book stack arrangement, where it's a narrow space with one book coming after each other and some kind of call a number system. In this kind of arrangement, you can have both closed and open stacks, but most often when this was first begun, you had a library acting as an intermediary between the patron and the collection. Now at universities like Columbia, these are open stacks, but they're very difficult to use. The last type of library we're going to be talking about is the modular library. It uses multi-use spaces. It zones spaces for different kind of use, for example, quiet and noisy. This kind of library building was begun after the Second World War, when the pedagogical style of teaching was focused on the seminary model, and it was also accompanied by a new and innovative kind of stack technology which made this modular library more attractive. This is a kind of library design that is still in use today, the modular library. And here are two examples of it. You can see in the first on the left how totally open the space is and flexible. All these components can be moved to change for whatever function is needed. On the right, you can also see a very Spartan modular library where, again, it's possible to shift and change spaces. So this has advantages and disadvantages, just like the two previous types of library design. The big advantage is that it allows for, again, flexible space and flexible programming. Before you begin any type of renovation, you want to align your priorities with those of your institution. The very first step is to consider what role your library building plays within your university. And this should be found in your library's mission statement. So let's think about that. Every library in a university is really serving as in a support function. How does your library serve your university? Let's take a look at possible ways this can be done, and I'd like you to think carefully about which of these is the one that is most like your library mission. One answer might be that your priority is to provide access to high-quality resources. Another priority might be to support student academic success and retention. Our top priority is to support research and innovation, or to provide outreach to the outside community. All very different goals, all perfectly legitimate, but not requiring the same kind of results in a library building. Okay, suppose you, in thinking about that, you decided your top priority is to provide access to high-quality resources. So what's going to be behind the design of your new library renovation? Well, you probably want to emphasize excellent access to digital materials, a good off-campus access for patrons, expensive databases. All those things are required for excellent research. Now, if you were at more of a teaching school, you might decide that your top priority is student academic success and retention, retaining the students. So in doing your renovation or reconstruction, you probably would want to think about things like library instruction, where would it take place, group study rooms for students to work together, other kinds of collaborative spaces like we saw earlier. Suppose you said your top priority is to support research and innovation. Well, then you really wanted to have a library renovation that includes collaborative space to support research, people working together. You want to spend your money on new technology, high-quality resources, and so forth. And some libraries, academic libraries, provide a great deal of outreach to the outside community. And in that case, besides providing access to materials, you want to think about librarian programming for patrons, comfortable seatings where people from the outside can come in, and so forth. In my experience, the most frequently cited priorities are B, our top priority is student academic success and retention, and C, our top priority is support research and innovation. But really any priority is fine. It's what your library is, what your mission is, and what is your university's strategic plan. Even if you have the financial commitment of university leadership, it may take a really long time before you even reach the planning stage of your new library renovation. And that's why it's crucial that you start with a strategic plan that gets the buy-in and support of your constituents. You need to hire the right architect, the right design experts, the right contractors, and you are responsible for keeping track of all the large and small decisions that need to be made along the way. It's really a huge process doing a library renovation, which of course is doable. It's just something that you have to realize right from the start. In working with an architect, there are generally 4 stages of the architectural design process. This is from taking your project from the very beginning to the end when it's being built. The first is called programming. The second is called schematic design. The third, design development. And the last, construction documents. What all these things mean? Programming is the process of collecting as much information as possible that will contribute to the best design. So this is really meant as a series of discussions to help you and the architect understand the purpose and function of the space that's being redesigned. During this period, in the beginning period, you'll probably have a physical inspection of the library. And it's often rather confusing because when architects speak of programming, it's not the way that we think of programming as librarians or administrators. For us, programming is what you do in the library, programs that you give. For an architect, they say that they program libraries, which refers to decisions that they make about spatial needs of the building. And generally, an architect will have a whole team devoted just to this initial stage because it's so important to the further development of the project. The second phase is referred to as schematic design, schematic coming from the word schema. And the architects and his designers will start to sketch out the style of the way the building will look, including the furniture, the finishes, and at this point he might give a three-dimensional representation of what it's like to move through the space. And this is where you often see architectural renderings. The third phase is called design development. At this point, the architects bring individuals from specialized trades into the project, such as structural engineers and tradesmen such as plumbers, electricians, and perhaps an interior designer and a cost estimator. Depending on the size of the firm, this may be handled in-house or contracted out. The very last phase are construction documents. And construction documents is a stage when the final plans are drawn up as architectural drawings. It's at this point that bids can go out to start the project, and these drawings are binding. So in working through these four stages, the final step is after review and careful thought and reallocating funds or for particular things that you or your colleagues would like to have done, your administration, the final construction documents are created, and these will be the plans that the construction crew and the electrical crew will be working from. So they have to be absolutely perfect, because if there's something wrong in them, it's really too late. Beginning the project. Before you even start to invite the architect to come, you'll probably send out several bids to find the one that will do your project in the most economical yet satisfactory way that you can. You want to start to collect documents in preparation from the project. What are these kind of documents? These are things that you're going to share with the library, with the architectural programmer when he or she comes to work with you. They're things like your institutional statement about, and library statements about the vision, mission, and goal statement. This is really important that you as a library are in sync with your master institution, your home institution. You're going to bring your universities and library strategic plans to start to collect them. If there are any campus master plans, this will affect how you can do your renovation, what space you can use, what's allowed by code. You want to get together some information about campus history and culture and demographics so that you can share with the architect information about your patrons, what your institution is like. You also want to collect, if you have one, a library needs assessment and environmental scan. And if you have documents from other projects, concept documents, building programs, architectural plans, if previously you've done a renovation, bring them as well. All of these will be of great help to the architect as he gets going. I would also suggest that you make a checklist in starting to plan for your library about what's right and what's wrong about, or maybe wrong is the wrong word, what you like about the library and what you would like to change about the library. So you can think of things like, is there enough space for the library's collection? Are we going to have to build more space to hold our books? Is there enough space for our users? Do we need to reconfigure space to be more collaborative? Does our staff have sufficient workspace, and are they able to do their functions, their operations efficiently? Is the library signage adequate? Are electrical and network wiring sufficient? Are facilities provided to distant learners? There are a whole list of things that you should sit down with your team and start to think through before you begin your project. Okay. There generally is today a common consensus of spatial organization, how a library, an academic library building could or should be organized. In this scenario, the first floor should serve public functions such as an information commons, group study areas, collaboration zones, and places for library help, for example, reference, circulation, and so forth, all in the same first floor. So everything is all together. This is a public area. For the upper floors of the building, away from public zones and prime areas of real estate, you want those used for quiet activities, quiet studies, for learning, for reading, all those things you would do away from the public space. Lastly, you'll probably want to consider for archives or special collections and your stacks to have them down in the basement, because stacks and our archives and stacks may be able to utilize compact shelving that's better suited to slab-on-grade conditions due to their concentrated weight. So in other words, stacks are very, very heavy. So when you have that archival material, you want them on the very bottom floor. Before or as you're beginning your project, you also want to see exactly what your patrons are doing in your library. This is sometimes called a day in the life of a library. So you'll want to spend time, probably at least a week, observing what your patrons are actually doing. You could have your staff certainly do that, and doing a survey of when the library is the busiest, when it's the least busy. How are patrons moving through the library? Are there any blockages? Are there places that are awkward for them to go through? What are the students doing? Are they talking? Are they collaborating? Are they socializing? Are they studying? Where are they studying? Where are they socializing? Where do the patrons gather at the library? What is the average amount of time patrons spend in the library? And these are things you probably are already doing yourself, because this is the kind of information that you need to make decisions about when your library, for example, should be open, and what your students should be, your staff should be doing. Benchmarking. Most often when libraries do a substantial renovation, the library renovation or team goes to visit other libraries that either belong to peer or aspirant institutions. By peer, I mean libraries that are essentially on the same level as you are, and aspirant are libraries that you would like to become, that you have in mind that you would like to become. So what you probably should do first is identify libraries that have recently undergone a renovation and arrange for a tour. Most libraries are happy to do that for you. While you're there, really take a hard look at what you like and dislike about the renovation. Are there things that you feel would work in your library and things that wouldn't? Take a good hard look. See what you might duplicate in your own library project. You might ask the person who's giving you the tour what they thought was unexpected about the renovation. Did they have any setbacks? Were there things that they hadn't planned for in advance? You could ask them if they would tell you what the cost was. Library renovations and expansion projects are very expensive. And you could also ask them what the reaction of the library's patrons, staff, and higher administration was to their renovated spaces. Library programming in practice. The library programmer will come and meet with you and your team, and usually it follows a very a schedule. They'll start by discussing the needs, objectives, and project goals that you have. And they're going to ask you to define all the activities that take place within the library. The next thing they're going to ask you is how the library, you see it being laid out. You want to establish specific mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and similar things. You'll discuss and recalculate several times the cost model. And once the program is confirmed, you'll need to build a consensus and review alternatives. Building consensus. It's very important to build consensus both among your team and among your users and your administration. You have an enormous amount of people that you have to both please and manage. These include library administrators, library staff, faculty, students, IT staff, the university financial officer, members of the outside community, as well as the people you're hiring, architects, interior designers, and so forth. These are the people who are going to make your project happen. So you want to engage them and also survey them about what they feel about the library. So each one of these user groups has a different approach that you might try. With students, you could try hands-on activities, surveys, storyboarding, scenario plan, get them to do hands-on things that help them decide what it is and what they don't like about the what they would like to see in the library. Faculty generally respond better to focus groups. If you sit down with them one-on-one or in a small group to find out their needs and their opinions of the library. For staff, it's critically important for them to test out new technology before you purchase it, and also to go through workflows that will be established once the the renovation is completed. The community, on the other hand, you probably want to look to address them through some kind of persuasive narrative or storytelling to engage their interest in what's happening. And lastly, with institutional leadership, you will probably want to demonstrate how what you're doing is aligned with the needs of the university. After all, we serve the university, so anything you do, how does it benefit the students, how does it benefit the faculty, and so forth. Key elements in the 21st century library. There are three particular elements, just as much as the modular and flexible library space, that define what make a 21st century library. And they are technology, lighting, and green design. Technology is often called ubiquitous or pervasive. And it's possibly the most important factor in your design, and it's probably the most expensive part of the project because it's constantly changing and frequently needs to be upgraded. It's very difficult to plan beyond 2 or 3 years for technology, and you want the library building to last 20 years or more. I'm going to skip this and go to this. You can see here the changing face of library tech. Over here on the left, you have a first bookless public library in Texas. It's called a bibliothèque. On the right, you have the Lebanon Library Technology Center. But the person who's going to really make this happen for you is your library IT or technology team specialist. And what should this person know how to do? Well, first, to be able to investigate and select appropriate hardware and software, be knowledgeable about issues of accessibility and green technologies, be knowledgeable about blueprints, being able to read them, timelines, working with consultants, just be familiar with data communication and distribution systems, and to integrate wireless products into your plan. So the IT technology specialist is really a person who's very important in the project and whom you're going to have to depend on. Lighting. There's been a real change in lighting because it's one of those radically changing fields that's really being driven by scientific knowledge about how light works and also by environmental considerations. So some of the trends now in lighting are that lighting is designed for users, not for buildings. that you want to use lighting selectively, use as much green technology as you can. These are like LED bulbs. And that there's a real benefit to natural lighting within a space. It's visually comforting and pleasant for the user. We can take a look here at some of the examples of new kinds of lighting. In the lower left, right over here, you can see that the light is focused on the desk below for reading. Whereas over here, you have a gallery space that has low voltage light with a huge amount of natural lighting coming in from the top. A lighting used here that changes the color of the walls, that makes it a more pleasing color. And over here, an outdoor space with light. So there are many, many different things that you can be doing. Here's another space a little bit closer up of a gallery. Absolutely beautiful, right, with the natural light coming in. When you use a lighting specialist, you want one who has a very deep knowledge of the kinds of lighting, ambient, directional, recessed, track, and so forth, and who's able to combine light with color to create different moods in a library space. You want them to know how to bring in natural light. You want them to know the effect of natural and artificial light on rare books in your special collections. You want this person to know how to light bookshelves correctly and be conversant in new technology. Sustainable or green design. So we've talked a bit about technology, the importance, the critical importance of technology, of lighting, the proper kind of lighting, and now we'll talk a bit about sustainable or green design. There are different forms of certification that are used in green design. And the certification takes the form of three principal types of standards. One is called FOSHRE. It's a Global Society of International Standards. The second one is called LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And the third one is called Green Globes. It's a commercial building certification system. And all of these are used to rate the sustainable functions of the library that you are building, or the library space that you're building. Sustainable design is really a philosophical approach that was put into practice in the past 10 or 20 years that define a 21st century library just as much as technology does. And its origins are in the green or environmental movement, but in the U.S. it goes all the way back to the 1840s. And this approach has become possible because of the technological advances like solar heating, better insulation materials, and water conservation. Now I'm going to assume that I'm going to go a bit over since we started a bit late, and I'll rely on Dr. Abdallah to let me know that. Survey question. This is something for you to think of. What are your top priorities in sustainable design? They might be saving money, which is one very good goal. Being a good steward of the earth, recycling, energy conservation, waste management, innovative technologies. All these things are part of sustainable design. And the nice thing is that they can all be taken care of together in one space. So we have here some examples of sustainable design. The first is waste management, and I'm going to show you an interesting example of the Dubuque, Iowa Carnegie Stout Library. It's one of the very first Carnegie libraries that were built with Carnegie funds in 1901, and it's on the National Historical Register of Buildings. And they have something called a green cleaning program where they have procedures for the handling and storage of cleaning chemicals. They train staff. They have a waste reduction policy that goes well beyond recycling. Their policy covers what steps the library will take to avoid sending items to the landfill by donating computers and so forth. So just in this very modest way, they've done a lot for the environment just with the work that they're doing. The second one is something you may have heard of called xeriscaping, and it's a method of landscaping that is now used everywhere. It emphasizes water conservation techniques, including the planting of native and drought-resistant plants, and also mulching. And this is commonly used in regions that are very arid and very dry. So here's an example in California where they've taken natural plants that are native to the region and use them for water conservation. We also have water management. The example I'm going to show you is from the West Valley campus of College of the Desert. And at the center of the campus, you can see how very, very dry it is. There's going to be a man-made arroyo, which means a dry riverbed in the center. It's going to collect rainwater, lead it to a retention pond where it will be stored and used for irrigation. And lastly, I'm going to show you a project that emphasizes energy efficiency. This is the Tom Brady wing of the Richard Riordan Central Library in Los Angeles, and it's using something called a cool roof. This particular library houses the third largest collection of books in our nation, and now it has a reflective roof which turns the library into a leader in sustainability in Los Angeles. The roofing, this kind of roofing saves them $32,000 annually. And it also helps control the temperature and humidity levels for the library's rare book collections. So it's a fabulous use of money to put in this kind of a roof. Okay, the last section that we're going to look at is what does a successful 21st century library redesign look like? And we're going to take a look at a case study at Fenwick Library at George Mason University. And let's see how well they've done in picking up on trends in the architectural design that we've been talking about. I'm going to give you some data about the project. The architect is Shepley Bulfinch Design, which is a prominent architectural firm in the U.S., who was associated with the architect of record, the one who built it, the Lukemere Partnership of Arlington, Virginia, which is in the South. Look at the time to completion. They did their feasibility study all the way back in 2007, but the renovation didn't get going till 2012 and wasn't finished till 2016, which is 4 years. The cost was $60 million. The existing structure had dated from 1967, and they planned a very ambitious renovation. They wanted a reading room where they would have formal events, a research commons, to support individual or collaborative projects, a 24 study space and cafe, and a study area for graduate students and additional book storage. So they were asking for a lot. I want you to take a look at these pictures here of what the library looked like before. You can see very poor lighting, 1960s style, the cramped spaces, not particularly oriented towards human beings, and there's absolutely no flexibility at all in this design. You can see also the front of the library, which is again very 1960-ish, with the entrance looks very, very tired, and the light coming into the building almost seems like an afterthought here. Okay, their renovation. What they did was they greatly expanded the services, their learning spaces and digital technology. They created a modern, bright facility. You can go actually and read this yourself. And they, again, made a very conscious decision about where to place materials. So they put their, importantly, on that very first floor, a collaborative area. It includes their cafe, places for students to gather, reference, and so forth. So the renovation consists of the first floor, an information desk, which is a unified full-service assistance desk, a cafe space to study. They created 30 new group study rooms. They have laptop checkouts, all sorts of technology in rooms, new classrooms, and so forth. So this is something, it does actually really follow the kind of things that we've been talking about as far as design and implemented them beautifully. Here is the new building facade. Here is an absolutely gorgeous view of the way the library looks with soaring ceilings. You can see the natural light coming in and how carefully the light has been placed. Here's the circulation and entrance area. You can see over here on the left circulation, again, how gorgeous it is and how many spots there are just for students or users to congregate. The beautiful view from the top to the bottom, so people feel connected. Here are some quiet zones for studying. Further up, you can see that they've gone and made a very innovative space of this kind of semicircle for users to study and be quiet in. I've come now basically to the end of my presentation. I'd like at this time to take questions from you by having you use the chat function.
Thank you, Professor Marta, and we are waiting for any engagement from the participant with us. So anyone can just write down on the chat window any question he has.
I have somebody here requesting to speak, but I think we want them actually to use the chat function. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly, because actually we need to give the chance for everybody because the internet connection, and also to read the question itself. So all the question will be written on the chat.
I see that. I'm waiting. He's typing right now. I mean, I have a note here from Amal Mustafa, who says that Singapore National Library has also utilized green options. There have been, as I've been talking, actually remarks that are being made about green design, for example, and how important it is to have benchmarking and also some kind of gathering documents together before you actually begin. Now I see that Dr. Mustafa has responded yes, that he agrees with that. Okay, I have a question here from Mr. Hayek. He says, I work at a library where around 800 visitors come daily, and most of them are children. They spend it some around 5 to 6 hours, and that's exhausting. The staff, what is the optimal solution to take control of this big number of children where children have the access to move through the library and the activities rooms as they want? Well, we've been basically talking about an academic library space, but as far as other kinds of spaces for children, I would imagine that you would like to look at how public libraries are going and using their programming. Really, it's less, I think, about space and more about programming for children. And I think that that would be the area that I would look at to create programming for them. I have here from Mr. Abbas, there are guides for academic library design. That's absolutely true. Mr. Kayat says it's a tendency to establish green library applicable in our region. I mean, Arab countries, I would say for sure. All the things that we have looked at, xeriscaping, which is landscaping, water management, waste management, all those things are certainly reflective roofs are applicable to Arab countries, and I'm sure that just by looking through the literature that there are a great amount of information just about that, but of course they're applicable. In our point of view, how far do our Arabic libraries can utilize green options? As far as utilizing green options, I can see that this is a really important topic and concern for libraries in Arabic countries. As I said earlier, the things that are considered to be green design or things having to do with landscaping, with water maintenance. We saw, for example, that the library in California, that of Dry Desert, which had used a basin to collect water, and so there are many different very innovative types of design that you can use. In the book that I edited, you can find actually a whole chapter on green design, and it's very, very carefully done with a lot of suggestions. So I would suggest that that might be one way to start. Mr. Mustafa says, if it needs complicated technology, which might not be available, I think that yes and no. I mean, some of these things, for example, just waste management, those are things that you can put in very simply. As far as solar panels, all those things, I don't think that those are so expensive, but certainly more advanced forms of technology are expensive. But you saw also in the case of the library in Los Angeles, they saved $32,000 a year once they put their reflective roof in. So there are pros and cons of everything. I have here from Mr. Abbas, what about the presentation? Presentation you have to discuss with Naseej. They are the ones giving the presentation, and you'll have to ask them about its availability. We have here from Dr. Abdullah, we need some insight on intellectual commons at academic library buildings. Okay, intellectual commons, I think we really call them learning commons, are ways, there are spaces within a library, an academic library, that are used for a number of different things. The most important thing is to gather together students for a particular function, to do something within the library. So we have learning spaces, intellectual common spaces, where students work with a team of people. They will work with writing instructors. They will work with librarians, all sorts of people who are focused just on their needs, but they're collected in one space. You have other kind of intellectual commons, as we saw with the two examples. One that was organized just simply around newspapers and around reading. Another one that focused on having students connect outside to all sorts of different experts. So really the idea of the learning commons is a space where students can come together to learn together and to learn from others and from experts. So that's how I would define it. Mr. Abbas says, we in the Arab world, the librarian starts working after finishing the buildings. So I guess what you're saying is that the building is already done before you actually go in there. May I ask you, Mr. Abbas, how much input does the chief librarian have into the building? Mr. Abbas, how much input do you as a chief librarian have into the design of the building? Is there any input by the library administration? Okay. Okay, so what I've been talking to you about is a very different model of doing library construction. It's much more collaborative. It's based on working as a team with getting input from a variety of different constituents, all the way from the administration to the student. So that's a very different approach, but I hope by having listened to that there are some ideas that you can take back to your own library. For example, the idea of surveying patrons about what they like and don't like about the library and doing it in different kind of ways, using surveys for students, using storyboarding, using focus groups for faculty. They're all, I think, hopefully helpful in getting feedback on what they think of the library. Mr. Mustafa says a survey would be a good tool. Yes, Mr. Mustafa, it would be an excellent tool. And I would imagine that before the library is built, that there can be or should be input from the potential users, the university, and so forth, to get a good sense of what is required. Are there any other questions? Yes, it is true, Mr. Mustafa, that sometimes faculty needs are different than students' needs. And what I would suggest for that is doing a focus group where you work directly with faculty in a small group. Mr. Abbas says, thank you, Martha. Thank you.
Thank you, and I am confirming, appreciate it for all the participants, and I'm confirming of this thanks message from the participant. We totally appreciate your time and effort, Martha. I know that we know each other for a long time, and we have common things about the trends in library. So this is the first time for us to have this webinar with you, and it will not for sure be the last time. Again, thank you for your time, and I would like to answer one of the questions that appeared here. The presentation will be delivered for all the participants, and also it will be available on Naseej Academy website. I would like to thank all the participants again, and we inviting you to the upcoming webinar and workshops and other events for Naseej Academy, and it will be announced from time to time on our website. Thanks for everybody. أشكركم جميعا وإن شاء الله نلتقي في لقاء. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.